As you heard, today's reading involves demonic possession. And I think that's a problem for a lot of us. I think in our society today, the whole idea of demonic possession is troublesome. And an example of this was the resources that I consulted this week as I was preparing my message. Some of them would say something like this. They'd say, well, you know, as the first century people didn't know a lot, but this was probably some kind of mental illness. And then other resources would say, now this needs to be distinguished from mental illness because we're talking about something completely different. So the experts are all over the map on what exactly is going on here. I think we do struggle with the idea of demons. You know, the idea that we have trouble, right? You know, you get into your car and you find out it's out of gas and has a flat tire. We don't have any problem with the idea of trouble. But when we say, this always happens to me, you know, somebody's got it out for me, we know that that's not really true. And so we don't really tend to personify our troubles. We don't say, this car has it in for me, except sometimes we do, right? And sometimes we, you know, it's like, I know that this car, you know, I had a better car before or whatever, right? So sometimes we personify the things in our life that give us trouble. And we just don't know, well, yeah, but am I really just, you know, kidding myself? Or is my car possessed, right? So we don't tend to go there, right? That's not a place where in our culture people feel comfortable personifying the bad things that happen to them. They say bad things happen to everybody, but there's no evil personality. There's no metaphysical being that is focusing evil into my life. And so we struggle with that. And at the same time, there's all kinds of things that we don't understand, and in fact, nobody understands. For example, there's been these stories, maybe you've seen some of them. Somebody is suing TikTok because her son, she claims, was driven to suicide by the algorithm that TikTok was using to present videos to him. And the algorithm, the nature of the algorithm is that nobody knows what it was doing. That they know the rules, but it's driven by the videos you've watched in the past, the videos other people are watching. So it's a very dynamic thing. And so you know, we can give it the name algorithm, right? But nobody actually understands why that video happened to be presented to that one person. We have the same problem today with large language models, AI models, right? Where it's a function of everything that they can possibly read. They read all the books, all the news, they read all the chatter on social media, and then they hand you something back, right? And you can say, well, it's the algorithm. We can say it's the large language model, but is that really answering the question, right? There are these things in our lives where, you know, we can say that's not really a person, but can we say that? You know, why is it that these programs, I mean, that case is not alone. There's other cases where people are suing social media companies and AI models, AI companies, because of the bad results that come out of their advice or the output. So I don't know if that's demonic, but I will tell you this: if I was a demon, that'd be a great place to hide, right? You know, you could do a lot of damage and nobody would even know you're there. So I don't know. I don't know about demons, right? So I'm going to leave it there. The New Testament is very comfortable with the idea of demons. It talks a lot about unclean spirits and demons and devils and things that maybe make us we might have a little bit of a struggle dealing with in our age today. But that's only half of what our story talks about today, because it talks about demonic possession. And possession is something I think everybody can agree happens, right? There's all kinds of ways that people are possessed. If you look at the word, what does the word possession mean? It means to be mastered by something. It means to be owned. You know, the kids today, these youngsters, they talk about being owned. You know, oh, he got owned by that person, right? This idea of somebody defeated you and you got owned. So the idea of being possessed, there's lots of things that possess us. You know, obviously the most ready to mind examples are things like addictions, right? There's substances. People have substances that really control them, and they know better and they still do the thing that they're doing, right? They're drinking themselves into a grave, or whatever the saying might be. So we know about things like that. There's addictions. There's compulsive behavior. I don't know why I said that, right? everything from gossiping to getting out your phone in the middle of a meal because it drives you nuts to know that the phone is there and you haven't looked at it in minutes. So there's compulsive behavior, right? And we'd say, well, okay, well that's I can quit anytime I want, right? So that's an example of the addictive or compulsive behavior. So that would be an example. Another kind of example is ideas particularly in the area of politics. You see people where you've met them, maybe you're related to them, where Donald Trump can do no wrong, right? And it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter what he said yesterday versus what he's doing today, right? Donald Trump can do no wrong. And you probably also know some people where Donald Trump can do no right, right? Where before they even hear the news, they've already got it figured out and they're going to filter it through that mindset and they are captured. They are owned. They are possessed by that particular mindset. And it's just one example of a cognitive distortion. You know, people who are catastrophizers, who are always seeing things in black and white. They never see any kind of shades of gray. There's lots of ways that ideas possess us. So that's another example. And then, of course, there's stuff. So Thoreau said that we don't have our things have us. And, particularly they have us in the way that we've got to pay for them. So you've seen the bumper sticker, I'm sure, I owe, so off to work I go, right? I don't want to go, but the bills have to be paid, right? So that's an example of something where we talk about somebody being a wage slave or somebody who's what is it? I owe my soul to the company store. There's lots of ways where we are mastered by the things in this world. And so we understand possession, even if we're not sure about demons. We understand the idea of being possessed. And so the question about possession is, can anything break the grip of that possession? When we are possessed by something, whether it's an addiction, whether it's a substance, a compulsive behavior, I wash my hands all the time, whatever that looks like, whether it's something like that, or whether it's an idea that we just can't seem to shake and it's like it keeps coming back to us, whether it's our debts or the things that control us in this world. Is there anything that can break the grip of that? And this is a church, so the correct answer is yes, there is. There is someone, not something, who can break the grip of the things that possess us. And that's what we're reading about in our lesson today. It's not just about demonic possessions. It's about Jesus who breaks the grip of the demons on this man. So we're reading in chapter 8 of Luke's biography of Jesus. And so Jesus is getting it. So we're picking things up in verse 26. So it says, Jesus and his disciples sailed to the Gerasenes land, which is across the lake from Galilee. If you're curious, if you read if you read all three accounts of this, it's in three of the gospel accounts, and if you read it, there's often a footnote that says that some manuscripts say Gergesenes, some say Gadarenes, and some say Gerasenes. So there's a lot of arguing in the early copyists about what exactly was the name of this place. But it was this place, the Gerasenes land, and it was across the lake from Galilee. So if you think about the Holy Land, running north to south or north to south is the Jordan River, and it's got two big lakes in it. So the Sea of Galilee at the top and the Dead Sea at the bottom. So Jesus has crossed over from the west side to the east side. So now he's on the east side of the Jordan River. He's in a region that is called, the bigger region is called the Decapolis. And from its name, Decapolis is the 10 cities, Decapolis, and that's a Greek word. And so that tells you that that culture is still more influenced by Greek culture than by the Hebrew culture in Galilee. So there's a lot of Gentiles who live there, and we see that also when they're keeping pigs. That's something that Jews wouldn't have done. So Jesus is now in Gentile country. So he's crossed the lake and he's in Gentile country. And just as a kind of context, it says he crossed the lake. On the way there, he was in the middle of a storm that was so bad that seasoned fishermen were afraid, and Jesus calmed the storm. So if you've heard the story about Jesus calming the storm, that happens right before here. So Jesus has crossed the lake, he's calmed the storm, and he arrives in this Gentile country. And the first thing he meets, as I mentioned to the children, is a very scary man. How many of you look away when you drive past a homeless man on the street? How many of you, roll up to make sure the window's rolled up and the car's locked? Scary people aren't that hard to find. If you're taking a walk through one of our parks and you see a homeless encampment, do you find that frightening? Jesus finds a very frightening man. The first person he sees on the east shore of the lake. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a certain man met him. The man was from the city, and he was possessed by demons. So he was unable to control what he did. For a long time, he'd lived among the tombs, naked and homeless. And when he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down before him. And then he shouted, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." So he says, "Jesus, what are you doing here? Why are you bothering me now? Now's not the right time. You're here too early." Right? So he's saying, what business am I of yours at this point, Jesus? And he calls him Son of the Most High God. That would be the language you'd expect from Gentiles. Gentiles, part of a pagan culture, they have the idea that there's various gods and then there's one Most High God. So it's not that he recognizes anything about Jewish religion, but he understands that if there is whoever the Most High God is, Jesus is his son. So he says this. Why does he say this? He says this because Jesus had already commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. And then it says, I don't know why Luke doesn't just give us kind of a linear story, but he tells us these things in kind of an odd order. So he says, many times the demon, had taken possession of the man, so he would be bound with leg irons and chains and placed under guard. But he would break his restraints and the demon would force him into the wilderness. And there's just something very ironic here. So this demon has been tormenting this man for who knows how long. And the first thing the demon says when it encounters Jesus is it says, "I beg you, don't torture me." Right? Don't do to me as I've been doing to this man. And Jesus asks him, "What is your name?" And it's not clear, is the demon answering, right? Is the demon trying to avoid being commanded? In primitive cultures, there's often an idea that if I know your name, then I've got a secret and I can command you, right? So I'm not sure the demon is telling the truth here. It's certainly not answering directly. So instead of giving a name, he says, "Legion." There's a lot of us. Saying there's lots of demons in here. So Luke says, it says, because many demons had entered him. So he says, legion, how many? We don't know. A Roman legion was between 5,000 and 6,000 men. So if he's telling the truth and demons never tell the truth, then call it 5,500 people. So 5,500 demons in there. But really, I think he's avoiding answering Jesus because he's thinking, if I give him my name, I can, or if we give him our names, he can command us. But that isn't a problem for Jesus because it says they plead. So he says he's already commanded him to come out. So they pleaded with him not to order him back into the abyss. And so they see that there's a large herd of pigs. Again, this is a Gentile country. There's a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and Jesus gave them permission. So why is it that Jesus doesn't send them to the abyss? Instead, he says, maybe he's telling, maybe the demon was telling the truth there at the beginning. It's not your time. Why are you bothering me now? We don't know. Luke doesn't explain it to us, but for whatever reason, Jesus does not send the demons into the abyss. Instead, he lets them go into a herd of pigs. And maybe because it is a kind of visual metaphor, when we see what the demons do to the pigs, we understand really why demons are bad, because they immediately stampede this herd down the cliff into the lake. So Jesus has cast out the demons. They've gone into the pigs, and the pigs have drowned. So now the witnesses, those who tended the pigs, saw what happened. They ran away and told the story in the city and the country. Basically, city and the country, that's everybody they bumped into. And people came to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus, and they found the man from whom the demons had gone. And unlike his usual presentation, he's sitting at Jesus' feet, fully dressed and completely sane. And they were filled with awe. They realized something special has happened. This is a holy moment because Jesus has done what had never been able to, even chains couldn't keep this man, couldn't make this man behave less dangerously. And so now he's completely in his right mind, and they're filled with awe. And then the people who had actually seen what had happened told them the whole story, not just that the man had been delivered, but here's the whole story of what happened. And at that point, this holy awe kind of turns into fear. Everyone gathered from the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave the area because they were overcome with fear. So Jesus does, right? He gets back in the boat and heads across. But Luke adds this: the man from whom the demons had gone begged to come along with Jesus as one of his disciples. And Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell the story of what God has done for you." So he went throughout the city proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. And you might notice there, Jesus said, proclaim what God has done for you. And for whatever reason, the man says, no, I'm going to tell you what Jesus did for me. And maybe that's just like, I don't understand the Jewish God, but I do understand the guy who healed me. So we don't know how much to interpret that, but he's equating God's action with Jesus's. So that's what he does. So what is the lesson here? As I mentioned, demons are difficult, right? We struggle with the idea of demons. We're and I don't know all the reasons we do. I can think of some, but I know I find it difficult, and I know a lot of people do. We struggle with the idea of demons. But possession, we see possession all the time. We see people possessed by substances. We see people possessed by bad ideas. We see people possessed by the stuff that they've got to deal with, the possessions, the actual material possessions that they have. There's lots of things that control us. And the question we're looking at is, what can break the grip of the things that control us? And my guess is something that controls you. The New Testament never says that you won't be controlled by something. In fact, in the letter to the Ephesians, Paul says explicitly, we are fighting with unseen forces. So Paul says, we aren't fighting against human enemies, but against rulers, authorities, forces of cosmic darkness, and spiritual powers of evil in the heavens. So the New Testament never says there won't be a struggle, that you're just going to sail through life and nothing's ever going to bother you. The New Testament is perfectly clear about that. It says, you actually have enemies. We have enemies. That there are unseen enemies that make our lives difficult. So a question you might, maybe it might help you reframe your troubles, right? Why is it you're facing this problem? And, it's not because she's a bad wife. It's because you both have an enemy. And maybe that's helpful to you to reformat it, to reframe it that way. But if you have a struggle in your life, that's to be expected. But the answer that the New Testament gives is not, well, try harder, right? Show some self-discipline, man up, right? That's not what the New Testament says. The New Testament says, if you have a bad master, what you need is a better master. You need a stronger master. So you should serve a stronger master. That is the New Testament's lesson. And what we see in this story and the one before it about the storm is that Jesus is a stronger master. Jesus can master the weather patterns, the things. It was funny to hear the kids talking about tsunamis and everything. Jesus has shown he can master those, and he can master a legion of demons, whatever that actually means. What is this legion of demons? And so this is why, we call Jesus Lord all the time, but if you read Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of the New Testament, he calls him the Master. All the way through the book, he calls him the Master because we don't really have lords, right? We don't know what a Lord is, but we understand what a master is. And so the idea that Jesus is someone who can master the things that master us, that's the picture that's being presented here. And some of us are still in that place where we are still struggling, where there is something that some days are better than others, but from time to time we just kind of get blindsided, and before we know it, we're down that destructive path again. So some of us are still dealing with that. And the promise in the New Testament is that Jesus is a stronger master. So if we serve Jesus, we will be serving a stronger master. But some of us, it's like, yes, I know. I've been dealing with that my whole life, and what I've found is that Jesus is a stronger master. And the lesson for us, if we're in that category, the lesson is exactly what Jesus says to the man. He says, the man wants to follow around and be a disciple, and Jesus says, tell the story of what God has done. Now, I would just add this. Tell the story to people who've already seen and are wondering, right? You've met the obnoxious televangelist types. So let people kind of see what God has done and then tell them why. That would be my advice, because I've bumped into too many people who tell a story and it's like, I'm not seeing much here, but tell your story, because the world is filled with problems. They're filled with all kinds of problems. You can't begin to count all the problems in this world. And the New Testament says that those problems are either themselves or they are the tools that are used by our unseen enemies. And the way to deal with them is not by being stronger, not by manning up, not by showing some self-discipline, but by having a better master. And Jesus offers the world to be a better master. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we don't want a master. Nobody wants to be controlled. But in our desire to avoid being controlled by you, we find that we are controlled by so many other things instead. So Lord, give us the humility to recognize that we do need a master. We need a good master and a strong master who can prevent us from being subject to the things that would otherwise possess us. We ask this in Christ's name and for his sake. Amen.